From the start, I want to acknowledge that we are speaking as white people, white woman, white male, conditioned by a racist society like everyone else. So as we interact and investigate and look at this whole realm of racism, we're bound to make missteps, and I guess want to apologize on behalf of all of us for any ways that there are mistaken assumptions or in any way we might cause harm in this domain, because it matters the world to us to be serving into it. I'd also like to name what I think we all know, which is this current suffering is just trauma layered on trauma layered on trauma, with a pandemic and economy crashing and this reckoning yet again with our country's legacy of violence against Black bodies and hearts and minds. So there's just this huge instability, and also it always comes with this. It's an opportunity to deepen our attention and for transformation. So we know that periodically our collective armoring of denial gets pierced, and that armoring against really paying attention to and feeling the reality and brutality and violence of racism, that armoring can get pierced. And I can speak for myself. I can feel in a cellular way more awake to it, to the reality, and it brings up all the emotions. And we might hear from some of you what's being brought up. I do want to share one story as part of opening of a friend who's a Black man that was in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., when, as you probably know from the news, peaceful protesters were dispersed with tear gas and gun blasts by Trump as he came in to have a photo op. And the man went back the next day to Lafayette Square, and this time there were even more people really crammed there, and they were chanting, and he was in the crowd, and they're chanting Black Lives Matter. And he looked around to take it in, and he realized that the majority of those right around him were white. And he said, that's when I started crying. He told me just hearing white people scream Black Lives Matters made me feel more human. So I start with this because of this deep prayer that as white people, our caring will wake up, that as white people, we can really offer a courageous presence to the suffering and respond actively. One activist I know says, put aside caution, just affirm it, act on it, that Black lives truly matters. So in that spirit, again, I want to thank you for being here. And Jack, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Tara. I'm also grateful to be on this and glad all of you can join us. And I'm glad to be between two of my most beloved great teachers, Trudy Goodman, who's also my beloved wife, and Tara, who's one of my closest colleagues ever. And I'm just taking a breath. Like many of you, I'm heartbroken and pained and grieved and tears and worry, and also not surprised in some way. And I feel fired up because the outer fires actually touch the inner fires, as in the Buddhist teachings. The real fires of the world are greed, are hatred and ignorance. Those are the fires that we see burning, and those are the voices that are speaking out, saying enough of this, that we have to find another way. And we are, as Tara said, in a time of crisis that's a health crisis and an economic crisis, but most deeply it's a moral crisis. And it's highlighted by COVID and the deaths in the Black community. It's highlighted by the death of George Floyd and by all the suffering in the policing and healthcare and education that has oppressed Black people and people of color. and put their lives in danger for the whole history of this nation. And it's such a profound ignorance and question to us. How could it be that a child that's born, that looks out with the innocent eyes of every child, and then people look and say, well, whatever color, that's where you go, that's who you are, you go to prison, or you go, I mean, it's crazy. And it's so painful. And in a way, racism is the central wound of our society. All the other kinds of suffering, the economic injustice and the redlining and all the other things we could talk about, even our healthcare system, which got designed based on racist madness. It's as if we're still fighting the Civil War. And some are fighting it, and then some turn away, you know, because it's too hard to tolerate. But we have to turn our gaze. We have to tolerate it because there are millions of people who tolerate it on their bodies every day. And we have to somehow pause together and listen deeply. This is a time of really of deep listening. And look into our own hearts, me as well as anybody else in our lives, with truth and wisdom and love, and acknowledge our past and what's happened around us, and stand up for deep systemic change, because our whole society was founded on genocide and enslavement of people. And what we need is a national truth and reconciliation that starts with every town hall and every community until we tell the truth and come to reconciliation, and every kitchen table. And we can't do it right, but we can bring our practices of loving awareness and courageous presence and compassion. And we simply have to do it in whatever way we can with all the mistakes we make. We invited teachers of color to join us tonight. And our dear colleagues and Black colleagues who we esteem so much said, you know, this is for you as white teachers to do. And so we do it. And Thich Nhat Hanh says compassion. Compassion isn't just a feeling. Compassion is a verb. It asks us to let our heart be touched, the quivering of the heart, and then to stand up for as long as it takes, for however long that we are together in this. And in that spirit, at least we can listen to and support each other and begin in this night's conversation with one another, to hold hands with each other and stay in this. Trudy, dear.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Tara. Yeah, I too want to just begin by naming my location as a white, Jewish, cisgender woman, and to speak from just my heart's experience as a mom and as a grandmother, to the fact of that we have heard and wept for so many Black lives, so many lives lost to police violence, and sometimes we've watched, but there's something about what just happened, and watching that for me as a mother was just unbearable. And I really heard the call of the CNN news anchor, Christy Oglesby, and she said, you know, she was talking about her own experience as a mother and what it was like to watch this man cry out about not being able to breathe and call for his mother. And she said, you know, I need the white mamas to share this burden. I need my white friends to love me and mine enough to come running too. So this is what I really want to do as a white mama, to come running too. And that the way of doing that, it can be so many different ways. By having difficult conversations with family and friends, by working as I have for the last 10 years, but I don't feel like we really got any traction until maybe the last 5 years, to help Inside LA, our organization, be a more diverse and equitable and inclusive place. And it's always tricky to try to retrofit a white organization to be those things. But now that we have teachers of color and we're working together, we're getting a little more traction with that. So I appreciate all the things that Jack and Tara have said. I guess the one thing I want to add before leading a meditation, which I'm very grateful to get to do with you, is that Elizabeth Blackburn, who did, she's a Nobel Prize winning physician who did the work on telomeres and how the length of our telomeres have to do with our longevity and what helps generate the enzyme that lengthens our telomeres and so forth. She said the worst stressors, exposure to violence, trauma, abuse, and mental stress and illness, are shaped by a surprising factor all over the world, the level of income inequality in a region. Countries with the biggest gaps between their richest citizens and their poorest have the worst health and the worst violence. So, as the daughter of a public health doctor and who really dedicated his life to working at WHO and watching what's happening, all of these things in our country today, I just want to say I'm a mama in distress and looking for all the ways I can to come running. So now I want to invite you to, I'd like all of us to do some meditation together. Maybe we'll sit for, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes, not a long time, but just enough to settle, to look deeply into our own hearts, and for you to see what it is that you might like to add to this conversation with us, because really the purpose of this is to hear from you. So, I mean, for us to speak, yes, but with you in conversation. So please find your comfortable sitting posture. And then closing your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, just however you like to sit. If you're a meditator, sitting the way you know and like, and if you're new to this, just lowering your gaze part way. And just letting your attention drop gently down from the head into the body. And just feeling the stillness, this body sitting still. Movement of the breath against the backdrop of this stillness in the body. Just aware of the sounds of life around you. And then as you breathe in the aliveness of this moment, just releasing any tension that you may be holding in the body, in the mind, and the heart. Even take a deep breath in and release. And one more time. And as we calm down and settle into this moment, you can notice when the mind wanders away into the past or the future, as it inevitably does. And when that happens, just shift your body back about an inch, stepping back into this posture of receptivity. where we're receiving this moment and all it holds. Receiving the breath, receiving the sounds of life, receiving the flow of thoughts and feelings, and in this posture of poise, dignity, and balance, we can receive the pain of this moment, the heartbreak, the confusion, the peace, the joy, whatever may be happening. And trusting deeply that we have the strength, the willingness to open our hearts and receive it all. Moment by moment, each sound appearing and vanishing, each breath being born and passing away. Each thought and feeling arising, having its being, and passing, appearing and disappearing. In the midst of this difficult time, hearing the bird song, birds singing in our heart of hearts, the Buddha was very clear. All tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill or cause another to kill. One is not called noble who harms living beings. By not harming living beings, one is called noble. And if you'd like to, you can hold your palms out on either side of you. And imagine that we are holding hands, that we're radiating love and caring towards each other, towards all who are suffering, towards the entire world. Just radiating love and compassion, connecting hand to hand, heart to heart, in our intention to create a safe and welcoming space for all. So thank you, everybody. Now I think we would like to open up to have some dialogue. If you would like to speak, you can use the raise hand function or raise your hand. I don't know which our moderators would prefer.
So, Trudy, so the first question we have is from Heidi Bourne. And the question is, how do we help millennial white women connect to self-compassion as a means of helping others, not dismissing their value because of their whiteness? I'm concerned about our white fragility turning into self-loathing. So Heidi, if you want to just say hi so that you can show up on the screen and the teachers can see you, and then they'll answer the question.
I'm right here. Hi, thank you for taking my question.
Hi.
Hi.
Should I take this question? Would you
You
like?
could,
I just
sure.
okay. So Heidi, that's a great question, and I feel as though you actually had the answer in your question when you talked about the self-compassion, that for all of us to be patient and compassionate with where we are, because we're not going to be very good at dealing with this. Our culture hasn't taught us how. We, because of redlining, we're in segregated neighborhoods. We don't have, we don't know each other for the most part so well as neighbors and friends and family members. And so I think understanding that as our blind spots and vulnerabilities are revealed, we're not going to look good. And it's kind of like first noble truth. It's not your fault. It's just inevitable. We're not going to look good, but we're not concerned with looking good. We're trying to learn and open our hearts and be more conscious and courageous. And we are strong. And I think the message of self-compassion is that with kindness and soothing and attention to the suffering we develop, we actually discover our strength to be present with it. And And to me, that's a great antidote to the fragility that as white people we're conditioned to have. We get defensive. That I didn't mean that. I think also for them to understand the difference between intention and impact. That often our intention is good, but how it lands with somebody isn't. And to train ourselves to pay attention to how it lands. Forget about what we intended. What matters is the relationship and how it landed. And if it landed in a way that hurt you, Heidi, I need to pay attention to that and just be sorry about that and not defend what I meant, really.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So our next question is from Melody Baumgartner. I've heard it said by a few well-meaning friends that we're all the same and there's a universality to our human experience, as if that's the answer to our differences. I'm not sure how to respond to this, but I know some would consider this racist. Melody, if you want to say hi so we can see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Hi. Yeah, this is another important question, especially for people who are engaged in some form of a spiritual practice, because it's possible to use the spiritual language to do a bypass, basically, and say it's all one, or we're all one, and therefore, in doing that, to dismiss the differences that create so much suffering. And what's true is that we live in a world of paradox. We're both one and we're separate. And that's the reality of it. You know, your social security check comes to you and not to the person next door, no matter what their spiritual view about it is. And they don't want to, those people who say it's all one are not sending you their social security check. So it's a kind of, yeah. I think I listen a little more deeply because your question is so good. It's a way of trying to protect themselves, I think, that kind of statement, to not deal with the pain that we actually have to pay attention to our uniqueness, to what it means to be brown or black or indigenous in this culture, what it means to be a woman who can't walk down the street, and not be afraid in many, many, many places. That matters. And we might say we're all one, but we're all one with those women and we have to protect those women, all of them. So there's something underneath it that's trying to ward off the pain and the responsibility of it. And if we listen somehow with a heart deeper, maybe we can say, yes, that's right. And this also matters, and it matters great. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question is from Emily Gilligan. Hello, thank you so much for holding space for this. I'm a white social worker. My question is, how do I model being an effective white ally while dealing with the discomfort and fear that comes with saying the wrong thing or taking the wrong action?
Hi,
Emily.
thank you. I really appreciate you holding this space.
Yeah. So hi, Emily. Thank you for asking that one. And I think it kind of emerges out of some of what we've just been exploring. So I'm just curious for you, how it comes up for you. What have you been noticing so far?
I'm noticing for me that I work in a hospital setting. So we have all of those stressors of the pandemic. And then I feel very strongly about a lot of these things. I almost feel the need to be a leader in facilitating these conversations within my department because nobody's having them. And it's very uncomfortable to move forward without acknowledging this. So it's uncomfortable to be the person that feels the need to step up because I'm a department of 35 social workers. And today was the first time we had a conversation about it. So it just is really overwhelming and uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing one, that it's really uncomfortable. It's like this stretch to have to step forward when there's so many people and here you are, and there's these times are so intense. I'm also hearing a huge amount of caring.
I have the empathy and I don't have the lived experience.
Yeah. So what you asked, which I think so many of us are experiencing, is how do we go ahead? You know, I mentioned one activist saying, just without caution, just go ahead and step forward. This is our time. How do we do that when we're afraid of making mistakes? And we know we're going to make mistakes. As Trudy said it so perfectly, it's like that, it's the inevitability. Like in this realm of racism, all I know is that I keep on making mistakes, and I have to build this tolerance of how imperfect I am and really let it be okay. And there's a quote I heard recently through Pema Chodron, and it's fail, fail again, fail better. And the given is that our conditioning will make us forget things and do things with our lens too cloudy or whatever. But if we can tolerate it and be with ourselves, then we actually can listen deeply, learn what we need to learn so we can fail again, but a little better. It's really building affect tolerance. And I know you know what I mean by that, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm wondering for you, what would help you be okay with doing this imperfectly? What would you have to remind yourself?
That my intention is not to harm, that my intention is to add positive benefit to the collective. And in that process, we might have to make mistakes to get to that point.
That's exactly right. So here's what I'd encourage you to do, because this is similar for me. Let that be your practice of aspiration. And that's what in the Buddhist tradition, it's called, like really sense every day, because you're in the thick now, that you're setting that aspiration, that you know your intention is, please may this serve, in your words, but feel the purity of that. And I think you'll find it gives you the space to go ahead and do it as it happens and let it be okay. I mean, how does that land for you?
It feels spacious.
Yeah.
It feels like there's space for that instead of the fear just constricting everything.
Beautiful. Then we're in it together with that aspiration. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Next, we have a question by Paul Andrews. How can Buddhist practice help people see racism as a profound error in thought, widely shared, to be changed, rather than a personal moral failure, which creates ongoing resistance? Paul, are you with us?
Yes. Leo, could you just say the very first part? Or Paul, you could say, I didn't hear the very first part.
Sure. I said, how can Buddhist practice help people see racism as a profound error in thought, widely shared, of course, but rather than a personal moral failure? And just as background, I know it just from my own life. I know, having grown up in the Western tradition, a lot of the way that we evaluate our life is, are we a good or a bad person? And I think a lot of the resistance to discussions about race comes from the fear of being on the precipice of being called a bad person. Whereas if when somehow Buddhism has a particular way of approaching this, it says, we're just thinking wrong about these. It's a matter of ignorance, not of sin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think there's a real opportunity here for the Buddhist practice in particular to speak into that.
Well, I think it's not even a question. You offered a beautiful teaching on that. I think you're absolutely right, because the core problem is always our preoccupation with ourselves and making everything a story about how good we are or how bad we are, or, if it's threatening to us or if it's going to enhance us, and, all of that. And while what you're saying is true. I mean, we know that human variability and diversity, that's a fact. We're all wired differently. Even our neurology, we just have such a continuum of how we're wired. And yet the racialized power differential, that's a theoretical delusion. And so just understanding it's a delusion just like having the preoccupation with ourselves is a delusion, right? It's like
Right.
looking at the sky through a straw. So I think what you're talking about is very compassionate. It's beautiful because it really gives all of us a way to explore this painful territory that can be so much less painful when we're not taking it personally. I think
And
that's
I think Buddhism in particular has a metaphor that comes. It has a big backswing behind that question, And
I think so too. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
I'd just like to add something in because I think this is such a powerful area. It's so true that if we take it personally, we'll just sink. It's not like we can be helpful. So to really get that it's conditioning, it's the habit of mind, and yet to be okay feeling bad. I was just speaking with an African-American preacher yesterday, and we were talking about another part of Buddhism, which really talks about some shame is toxic, but some shame is actually helpful. And it's not personal shame, but it's that sense of shame that feels really, really remorseful and bad that this is happening, so that not only are we compassionate towards ourselves, but we're energized because it feels so horrible to be caught in that conditioning that we actually get active to change it. And there's sometimes that white people are so eager to self-compassion themselves out of the feeling it's personal that they forget that next step of opening to the realness of how bad it feels to have that conditioning. And I'm wondering whether that connects for you. Paul, you're muted right now. Yeah.
was that addressed to me?
Yeah, because you brought this up. I was wondering whether that resonates, that both that it's impersonal and yet it's healthy to feel the badness of the conditioning so that we actually act.
I think that badness, I'm no better at answering this than anybody else on this screen, but I think the badness for some people will, if they have a spiritual foundation, will allow that to happen. I think for others, it might take them away from it and create even more defense. So
that's right. If they take it personally, you're absolutely right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Nobody says that I'm absolutely right, Tara. I really appreciate that.
Oh, deep out. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is from Nikki Tekchandani. For those of us who are part of Buddhist Sanghas or work at retreat centers or go on retreat, how do we add more non-white practitioners to the Sangha? I used to work at Spirit Rock, and I know the latest cohort of teachers is all POC, but the practitioners are still mostly white. How do we become more inclusive to Black, Brown, Hispanic, and other POC? Thanks. Nikki, if you'd like to talk, so you can show up on screen.
Jack. Hello, Trudy. Hello. Thank you for taking my question. Hi, Tara.
Hey, hi. I'm glad to speak a little, and it may be that Jack and Trudy add some, because it's one of the most deep and compelling concerns, I think, in Western Dharma, is what's going to make accessible, welcoming, attractive. And I can just say a little of what's going on in Washington, D.C. that has actually increased the numbers, and that is that the more we have at least split teams where we have even number white and POC, that is beginning to send the message that you're a part of it, and people have really appreciated that. We also have built into our schedule sits for just POC. And there is so much safety in that affinity Sangha that it's attracted more people to the retreats because they know they'll be able to have that time. It's not a time where there's talking. At the very end, there is some sharing, but that really makes a difference. And then there's the background work of making sure that scholarships are available as much as possible, making sure priority and preference is given, those kind of things that we're working with. So that's what, that plus, of course, the teachers in this ever deepening attention to having our sharings be relevant, having them be inclusive sharings, having our examples and the style of the teachings be culturally inclusive. Yeah, thank you. Jack, Trudy, anything to add to that?
I think rather than adding, I'd like to, I don't know, Jack, you haven't, no.
I'll go through you, say, go ahead.
I was gonna say we'll take the next question, so you should add.
Wow. Like Tara says, it's a really important question for many of us for now. And when I think back to one of the first events that I taught for people of color, which was 30 years ago in a church in Oakland, Reverend E's church. And somehow in my misguided work in this, I thought, well, these practices of mindfulness and centering and compassion, they'll be good for people who are part of a community that's been targeted and in all the ways, the racist ways that we know. So 50 some people came, and to my surprise, they weren't new practitioners. In fact, almost everyone in the group had been practicing yoga and meditation for years. I mean, one guy stood up and he said, I'm the only Black vegetarian Buddhist doctor that I know, and now I found my people. And what they said is that we can't go to the white centers because we're alone there. There's a sea of white faces. And first we need to be and feel that the practice that we have and the lives that we live have woven together. So that sort of defines the territory. And now we're doing what Tara said in all these steps. But some of them really just have to honor how hard it is for the people of color to come in, even when we have teachers on the stage or people of color. And that's the suffering of the culture that we're living in, which we're trying to undo. So I'm just grateful for your question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Peter. I've personally found the self-awareness that I've gained through my mindfulness practice to help me gain awareness into my unconscious biases related to race. It's helped me to understand how sometimes, without conscious awareness, my words or actions may perpetuate white supremacy. Could you speak to some practices and techniques that will help me to build my muscle, to help recognize my own unconscious biases and work with them to help promote equitable speech and action? Peter, if you want to say hi so you can show up on the screen and the teachers will see you.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I appreciate your time and your energy here.
Yeah, hi, Peter. For some reason, I can't see you, but I think when you speak, hopefully I will. So the practices that you're already doing have helped you so much. Just embedded in your question is so much mindful awareness and actually self-compassion too. So I just want to celebrate that your willingness to learn and your eagerness to learn is already on a foundation of having opened your heart to learn and to be aware of just the things that we're all trying to be aware of, which are the consequences of our speech, the impact of what we say and do. And so part of me just wants to say, keep going, because whatever you're doing, it's working, Peter. And, you know, there are, I think, the practices of loving kindness, the practices of self-compassion, all strengthen us so that we don't have to feel so fragile and frightened of messing up and let our fears be in charge of us. So whatever brings courage to your heart so that you can, you know, raise your voice and speak up and enter difficult conversations without feeling so afraid of making mistakes. I think that's so common for us. And it's common in the space of race. It's common in the space of grief too, that we don't know quite what to say when people are grieving. But it just seems to me that you are already totally on the right track, and just what practices are you doing that are helping you specifically?
Oh, geez. I just sit and I scan my body and notice my thoughts. And it's more come up for me when I've been like exposed to different stimuli. Like if I see like a Black person on TV, just noticing like what are the first thoughts that come into my head when I like am introduced to that image, or like what is my like bodily response when like a person of color is like walking by me on the street, and just like noticing that. And then what I'm really trying to do is just have some compassion that my immediate responses are a result of like the culture that we all live in and the exposure that we've all had from birth to just like being in a racist society, and trying to acknowledge that and have a little bit of compassion for myself that I'm thinking the culture's thoughts.
I love that. I'm thinking the culture's thoughts. Well, you're right. We're not separate from each other, and we're not separate from our surroundings in so many ways. We're so connected. So, yeah, I would just, I don't know, just cheer you on, because what you're describing, there's so much mindfulness and so much awareness and so much willingness to learn. That is the part that I want to offer a big bow to you for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the support and the encouragement. It means a lot to me. Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
Good.
I'm going to add to the bow, and also just for all of us, I need to talk about it with other people. So I don't know if you have a buddy, or if you have a group that you interact with, but wow, when you're so, as Trudy said, you're so engaged with this, that to name it out loud what you're noticing and have other people name what they're noticing creates this whole fertile environment. So have you been part of a white awareness group, or do you have buddies that are into this?
I'm just starting to dip my toes in those water. I have a very supportive community of coworkers that I've been talking about it with. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. We need to do it together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next is a question by Ariel Friedman. How do we engage our loved ones, parents of my partner as an example, who harbor limited understandings of the spectrum of racism and only see it as a binary matter, like one is racist and they're not, or they're not? How do we engage with compassion, meeting them where they are without attempting to control them, while trying to engage in meaningful recognition, lovingly but mindfully confronting them with ideologies around the ways capitalist values have been built upon racial oppression? Ariel, if you want to say hi. It's you.
So much, and I know that was a mouthful, so thank you so much. I'm working through it, so I really appreciate this time and space.
Hi, Ariel. First of all, thank you for the question, because it's not your question, it's our question. You know, how do we engage? It could be in our family or in our community or the people around when we meet ignorance and defensiveness. And then you talked about how do we do it with compassion and so forth. What have you found that's worked so far for you? Unmute.
There I am. Thank you.
Great.
So, you know, I think right now more than anything, just I'm in a space of listening and learning and engaging in conversations and reading as much as I can. And I think I felt really overwhelmed by the deluge of whatever they're bringing into the conversation, like these rioters are not doing this right, or I'm not a racist person and I don't do this thing or that thing, and I don't support this thing or that thing. So more than anything right now, I've just been taking in the information and sort of like evaluating it as I construct how to lean in a really thoughtful and comprehensive way. So I think that that's I'm right here in the beginning, you know, I'm in the first few conversations. I've loved these people for a long time and found fault, you know, with my partner, with them for some time, but thinking about how to now bring this into the conversation. So I really haven't given that much pushback yet.
So first of all, your phrase in a thoughtful and compassionate way. I mean, you're doing the right thing to begin with in starting. And there's some way, in my experience, that it's very hard to teach your family. Even the Buddha had trouble when he went home, and so did Jesus. So you just need to keep that in mind. But what matters, I feel like, is if they feel that you love them. If what you're doing is, I want to listen and I love you. And then maybe if you also speak from what's true for yourself, I have found, or I've been hurting and I've learned this, not trying to change them, but letting you know, this is what changed me. I didn't realize, and if you do it because they feel your love and say, you know, this is what matters to me, it affects people. But I want to ask Trudy, she might have some things to add to this, please.
No, I'm happy with what you've said.
You sure?
I am.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, great.
Our next question is from Annie Tritt. As many, I'm already overwhelmed, losing all my work, having been sick for 2 months. I'm also the parent to 2 girls who are also struggling and also are Black. And I need not only to be a positive force in the world for our world, but especially for them. And at the same time, I'm overwhelmed. And as a white person, there's a privilege in being able to separate my overwhelm. But if it consumes me, I can't be of use. I'm not clear.
That's me.
I think is it your turn, Tara, or do you want me to take this?
Sure. I'm just, oh, there you are, Annie.
Thank you for
yeah.
taking my question.
Well, first, I'm just taking in what you said because I feel like you brought into this a tremendous amount of real-time vulnerability, and want to thank you for that. That feels courageous. Yeah.
It feels scary, but it's very real, and I'm through my practice trying to be with what is, you know.
Yeah. So the what is, and I want to play this back and make sure I heard you correctly, is the degree of the overwhelm that you want to be able to show up, but it feels so overwhelming right now.
There was already a lot of overwhelm, and now I feel my daughters have been my daughters for 19 years, so this is not new, but I need to constantly learn and show up, and the world, but as a parent, they always come first. And I feel like I can't do enough right now and I can't show up enough, and then I feel more overwhelmed, and then in my head that feels like a privilege because I'm white, but I need to find work, you know, so this whole layers of stuff, and I'm getting lost in that, I think. Okay, so what I'm hearing, and we'll unpack it a little, is that you have an idea of how you should be. And there's no way you can be the way you've got the idea you've got. You just can't meet that, right? So there's a sense that you're failing or you're falling short right now. And I wonder what would happen if you just let yourself sense what it's like to be living with that right now, that you're falling short. It's hard. It's hard. It really feels like that. Yeah. So if you just paid attention inwardly and felt the part of you that feels that failing, is it okay to just check in right now? Sure. Yeah. And you'll hear the thunder because it's stormy here. So yeah, so checking in and sensing that part of you that really believes you're failing right now, and that you should be doing it better. Is that the belief? Yeah.
Yeah.
and what it's like to feel that. And where do you feel that inside?
In my heart.
And you might want to just keep your hand there and just sense, okay, I'm listening to you. I'm listening to this feeling right now inside, of failing, of falling short, and just keep listening to it and just sensing what it feels like. And you just might ask that place, what does it most need from you right now? The part that feels like it's failing, what does it need from you? How does it want you to be with it?
It wants kindness. It wants kindness, and I'm probably stopping the kindness because I feel like there's the white privilege in being able to do this, and I need to act. So I'm thinking over the kindness.
So I wonder what would happen if you acknowledge those thoughts. Okay, there's thoughts about how I shouldn't be paying attention to myself because of white privilege. And then you said, thank you very much, but come back. Just come back, because you know this practice.
I do.
Yeah. And just say, okay, I'm listening. And is there some part of you that knows how to offer kindness? Or that feels some willingness right now?
Yeah. Yes.
And just stay inside a little bit. It might be a moment when all of us can just pause and sense, is there some way that we've been being hard on ourselves? Because it's often happening and we're not even aware of it. And sometimes we might have a belief on how we should be doing things differently, or that we shouldn't be paying attention to ourselves. But the beginning of being there for others is having that connection and intimacy with our inner life. So if you offer some message of kindness right now, and just sense, what are you noticing?
I feel so much calmer. I feel happier, and I could feel the presence of my daughters here, and they're not in the room, but my kindness to them too, because I know when I feel like this, the way I show up to them is so much more, I don't know, I'm always kind, but it's more present and there with them.
Beautiful. So you just offered yourself kindness and felt that heart space that included them. Yeah. Really invite you to let this be at the center of how you move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. It feels particularly hard right now.
I know.
I want to act.
Well, it gives you the grounds for acting. Sense if that feels true to you.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Blessings, Annie. Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Raisa Guzman Torres. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. How do we stay focused? I feel a responsibility to not let this fade into the background of our lives, but I fear I will forget the urgency that this holds for so many lives.
Hi everyone. Thank you to the teacher for taking my question. I want to make sure that I stay focused, and all that I see, that I continue to grow and be an ally. But it feels scary to feel like, I'll go back to my life and there are lives that are at stake. And I don't know what you can offer as advice for staying focused in this.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful and important question right now. I know somebody else was asking, why are we gathering now? Why didn't we gather before? Well, we're gathering now. And so it's good that we're gathering now. And there's something about the urgency of this moment, as you said, that's really allowing us to gather and explore together in a way that, who knows, we might not have had the guts to do it if it weren't for the urgency of this moment. And that wish to sustain the focus and to keep your heart open and to keep caring when you know that in the busyness of everyday life, it's just hard. I feel as though that question is also the question of how do we keep our practice in the center of our lives? How do we keep the focus on what matters most to us? And it seems as though even by, I feel this so many times listening to all of you asking your questions, that inside the question, you're answering it too. That you're caring and you're naming this and your wish to stay focused. You're naming that you understand impermanence. You know what happens when we have certain things that matter and then they fade away. And, we understand this in our practice. And so your naming it and your awareness of it means that you can find ways to remind yourself if you need that, when you need that. And those ways can be, it could be reading something, it could be making sure you have a friend that you connect with. I know my granddaughter who's 18 has a friend where they're actually having these conversations together and exploring together and reminding each other and learning with each other. So I think that's another way to help stay focused, is if you're in a white awareness group, as Tara was saying, if you have a connection to other people who care about these matters, who care to keep their hearts open. And I think you will, because you want to. And I can feel the love and the sincerity in your question, and I can see it on your face. Yeah. And if there's anything else that, my colleagues want to add.
Yeah, just a small thing. Another practice that you can do is the practice of making a vow. And that requires you could almost do it now. For example, for me in this area, having the very same question, one of the little vows I made is that I wouldn't give a teaching without mentioning racism. And it means every time I teach, I also have to bring that into my consciousness. And mostly all the time I do it. I've made other vows like that. But if you were to close your eyes now for a moment, or others listening, and simply reflect, if I were to make a vow to keep this alive, what would my vow be? What would sustain this? And it might be one of several, it's like the Bodhisattva vows, but very concrete. And as you listen, and whether it's now or you take time after this to do so, if something comes, write it down, put it on your altar, tell someone else that you care about, post it on the mirror, so you see it in the morning. And that too can be a practice to support the very thing that Trudy was pointing out that's so beautiful about the question and about your intention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Kelly Cobb. I'd love to hear your advice on how to best start this conversation in an elementary school classroom for 8 to 9-year-olds.
Hi. Thank you. I'm Kylie. I would love to just hear your advice on how to start this conversation with young children in a classroom setting.
I will jump in just because I have spent dedicated a huge amount of my life to working with children. And there are so many resources
So we are having, so Trudy and Jack, we're having some freezing issue now. Oh, I think you're back. You froze a little bit.
Okay, so Kylie, could you hear me or was it lost in the frozenness?
I heard you start to say there's a lot of resources, which I have definitely, I have like so many tabs open on my computer of all the readings that I want to do and all the curriculums and all the lessons. I think it's just, is there a resource that you particularly really like?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the teaching tolerance resources from the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yes.
I really like them.
Really good, yes.
I also like children. And part of why I like children so much, as you must if you work with them on a daily basis, you have to like them or
Yes.
it's pretty hellish. Part of why I like them so much is that, you know, they are not living in a world that is mediated by thought, and they are living in a world of very direct experience, which makes them much more malleable and flexible and open to learning. And, you know, I think that they absorb from their families the biases and that we all carry within us, whichever way we approach all of this, they absorb all that too. But the difference is that you have so much power in their lives and with their little minds. You know, they really look up to you. I remember loving my second grade, my third grade teacher. Once my third grade teacher came over for lunch. I mean, it's one of the high points of my life still that ever happened. So yeah. Miss Brubaker came over. Do you know what I mean?
Right. No, that's amazing.
So they just love you and they look up to you and, you know, they care what you think of them. And so you really have the ability to make a difference in their lives and to reassure each one of them that, you know, their willingness to learn and interact with each other and understand and get to know themselves and each other is what's going to contribute to their being the leaders of a more peaceful world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Yeah.
And thank you for working with kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for doing this.
Tara, Trudy, and Jack, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, maybe one more and then a closing.
Okay. So from Madhuri Kohatkar, as a woman of color, so this is less of a question and more something that was commented that a lot of people resonated with. As a woman of color, I feel there's some degree of bias and discrimination amongst all of us, learned behavior which we often don't recognize. Recognizing that and accepting our humanness and being aware and acknowledge it is important for acceptance. It's the same way we can handle the issues about Black Lives Matter. If we acknowledge their reality and offer kindness, can help us build bridges between us. So I'm wondering, Madhuri, if you wanted to.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Thank you for handling, taking my comment or question. I really think, I'm very, like we say, we all give ourselves, we've been trained, we've been taught, we've been learned, our biases and our learned experiences is the word, have given us so many, have constrained us, and put us in given us different boxes to view people. And, this practice that I find, really needs to spread like wildfire, honestly, because I think everybody in this group is committed, but this needs to spread because what this practice has given me is an ability to acknowledge my humanness, an ability to then offer kindness when somebody's pain, I can't relate to the pain, but all I can offer is kindness. And I think that helps
that's a tool. That's one of the tools that this practice really, really has taught me. And I'm still learning. This is a learned process. It's never. So I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I just want to, maybe Jack and Trudy would say something. I just love that this is what is coming right at the end of this gathering, because there's something about what you're saying about this practice helping us to be able to see those boxes and see each other and be able to extend kindness. That's where the hope is. And I know for myself, one of my kind of inner practices is whenever I see that I'm making anybody else less than me or higher than me, anybody in any way, less or higher. And it's the same thing. It's that mindfulness that starts alerting us that we're creating separations, and we all do it. As you said, we're all conditioned to do it. So this is the prayer. I mean, you're bringing in our hope that we can deepen our attention together. So I just want to thank you, and then invite Jack or Trudy to say something and then lead us in our closing.
Yeah, I guess I just want to address a question that wasn't asked, but it's in the chat and I saw it. And so I just want to say a word about that, because I know we're winding up, and that is, it's a question about being a white meditation teacher with a mostly African-American community. It's Teague's question. And I just want to say that talk to the people about your questions, ask them how it's landing in them. You know, you don't want to ask them to do the epistemic labor of educating you, but you do want to check in and be in dialogue about where the teachings are landing and how they're landing. And you'll feel less alone. And yeah, because your concerns are real. So thank you. And thank you everybody for coming and being part and sharing your hearts and sharing your questions. It feels so good to be able to do this together and to acknowledge our humanity and our imperfection and the mistakes we make and we have made and we will make. And we're just, that humility, it really touches my heart. So thank you, everybody.
Okay.
And I too add a really deep appreciation and gratitude for the voices that spoke up, because you could hear the wisdom and intelligence behind every question, and underneath that, the caring, as this very last statement that was so beautiful. What we can offer is kindness, but the questions about what do I do in my family, and the sincerity of that is because I love them. What do I do in my work? What do I do? These are expressions of care and love. And this is actually what's going to make the difference when we ask ourselves the question, what would love have me do today? You know, all these arenas, you know, with one another, in person, in the community around us, with those who are in danger. This is the voice that we have to listen to, and practicing together and getting quiet enough to be able to hear it and to also tolerate the discomfort and our humanness and our pain and all the things we've talked about. And as Trudy and Tara said, to be courageous and make mistakes and do it anyway. So let your eyes close gently for just a minute or two as we end. Take a couple or a few breaths to let yourself settle. And feel whatever is present with a loving awareness. Receive it in the field of loving awareness. The emotions stirred up, the state of your body, the longing, the love, the fear, all of it, held in the great heart of compassion in the field of loving awareness. And as Trudy had invited us to do, imagine you can extend your hands out and hold hands with all those who are in this circle listening and speaking together, and all the people they know and all the people they know, until we're holding hands with the whole vast world of humanity. We're in a birth process, and birth processes can be painful and messy, but they also can give birth to something beautiful. And feel your connection with so many, and let it be a channel of love and channel of tenderness and compassion and courage, that we hold hands together and offer any benefit from our words, from the care that we've shared out, that it may be benefit to people, to beings everywhere. And any mistakes or harm we may have caused, we ask your forgiveness. We want to learn. We're learners in this life. May we continue to hold hands now, on and on and on, with love and courage, and make a great difference in a world that so needs it. And if maybe people could be unmuted and put their voices in to say thank you or love or whatever they wish.
Hello. Thank you, everyone.
Deep gratitude.
Thank you all.
Thank you for holding this.
Namaste.
Hello, everyone.
Thank
so much.
Thank you. Love you guys. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Much love.
Thank
Thank you.
Much love.
Show your hands.
Namaste.